The way people have been making bioproducts, proteins, enzymes, drugs for years is using bacteria and other single-cell microbes and growing them up in big steel bioreactors that are highly engineered systems with all sorts of monitoring devices and blinking lights. And insects, these cocoon insects, caterpillars, have evolved over billions of years to just say, hey, we'll go into a cocoon state, we'll go into a bioreactor, we'll have some chemical processes, biological processes go, and we'll emerge as something completely different.
Hey, Karl, how's it going?
I'm doing great. How about you, Erum?
I'm living my best life. As we know from our previous episode, I was on my way to a girls' weekend. And it was fabulous, of course. These are my sorority sisters from college, so I've been close with them ever since. And we've gotten together across the years for weddings and kids' birthdays and all the concerts, things like that. It's been a while that all of us came together and hung out for a whole weekend. We really did it up sorority style. I created this agenda. So we had like different things going on, craft hour and fire pit time. But as I said in the previous episode, I was going to ask them about GMOs. So I was like, yeah, well, one of the things I wanted to ask you guys is, what are your thoughts about GMOs, genetically modified organisms? And at first they're like, what? You're totally like killing our buzz, What are you talking about? But one of my friends, Eileen, shout out to Eileen, she was saying that one of her kids has allergies and she has an association that GMOs cause allergies. So that's something that she brought up, that whole angle. They do look at the whole organic versus GMOs. One of my friends, Laura Grande, shout out to her family has a whole grocery store. A lot of it has Italian imports and produce and everything. And she's like, everything's natural, everything's organic at our store. But then I was explaining to them, I whipped out the Polybion wallet, the leather wallet. I'm like, this is made by microbes eating fruit waste. And then this came out, obviously the full wallet, but this material came out and they're like, what? And they smell, they're like, it smells like leather. I'm like, well, it's also because they do tan it and do a little bit of coloring and things. But yeah, like, well, that's cool. I'm totally down for materials and things that I'm not eating to be made through genetically modified organisms. And they were really fascinated by that. It was fun. I'm so happy to have spent time with them. It was perfect summer lake experience. We went on the lake, we hung out. It was like camp for grown women. And we had a break from our families and we really bonded. We all shared our stories, things that have been going on in our lives. So it was very therapeutic, I would say. So shout out to my girls again. And it was fun. I know you also had a very social weekend, Karl.
Yeah, it's unusual, but since I am basically a single dad right now, my wife is in the Adirondacks at our cabin with one of our sons. I'm in Brooklyn with my middle son, and he's taking a class at NYU Polytechnic. He's taking an electromagnetism class to get ahead of the semester. Everyone I saw is a friend of ours. I saw our friend Aaron Nesser, ex-founder of AlgaeNet, now known as Keel Labs, who we're going to have to get on here at some point. Aaron and I saw each other Friday night, talked about his website, Biodesign Jobs, a bunch of other things that he's working on. Then I saw our friend Allison Cutlin, who is a cosmetics innovator and formulator. She had started a brand called BioFile. It was a fermented skin serum, which was very well received. She's doing different things now, so we talked about that. And then on Sunday, I saw our friend Seth Yaktan, who's had one of the most played episodes of Grow Everything. Seth and I caught up. I found out what was going on in his world and the cannabis world and some of the biotech projects he's working on. We've talked a lot about the weather, mostly just because of the summer, and we've been having very hot weather in New York City, upstate in Vermont. It's been raining like crazy and some very heavy tropical rainstorms. Vermont was declared a national disaster because of the flooding there. But there was some news that I thought was really interesting apropos the weather, which is that people are finding that mycelium, which we've talked about in this podcast many times, actually has flame resistance. So I don't know if I mentioned this before, but last year at Biofabricate, there were these guys who showed these bricks that they've made from mycelium, and the bricks are so strong you cannot break them with a sledgehammer. And the comparison is if you took a cinder block and you hit it with a sledgehammer, you'd break it into a million pieces. But what I didn't know is apparently mycelium is also fire resistant. So that's very interesting for the creation of sustainable building materials.
It's also lightweight.
Yeah, it's also lightweight. And it's also something that you could have brought up with your girlfriends about My Forest Food. And it's interesting that your friend has an Italian grocery because the Italians have been on the front lines of banning cultivated meat. We've been writing about this. We've got a fact sheet that's going to come out soon. And it's very interesting not only to look at the consumer acceptance of cultivated meats in different places, but how different countries are accepting it. Singapore was the first country in the world to approve cultivated meat. The United States also approved it. Italy wants to ban it. France, I think it's illegal. Holland, which is a pioneer in the space, space. It's also illegal to sell it, but they can manufacture it. Spain is working to become the EU's leader in the production of cultivated meat. So it's very interesting to see different ways countries are approaching it. I've probably mentioned this in the past. I'm very interested in how it will change how people work on food. So I went from being social to talking about mycelium to talking about cultivated meat.
Yeah, and I wanted to make some comments on the weather too, because you mentioned the rains. It rained a lot also in Pennsylvania. It was really strange. My friend Kate was driving me back to the train station after our girls' weekend on Sunday, and that was when it was raining. But coincidentally, we were talking about how there was flooding from hurricanes in Philadelphia area years ago, and one of her family members were swept away in that flooding. Luckily, was found by a neighbor and was able to be caught and not go any further in that flooding. But then there was the story of the family being swept up this past Sunday. These two little kids and their mother got swept away in flooding. And it's just so insane that this is happening in an area that's not used to it. It's also very sad when it happens in the South. The South has experienced a lot of flooding, but here when it comes to places that aren't ready or haven't experienced it before, because we're also talking about the fact that her family member, despite all the warnings, they just didn't believe that it was going to be a serious thing in the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area, because they just never had that warning before. They never experienced it. So, and then I also compared that to when we had the haze here in New York City. At first, didn't know what was going on. And then it started getting very, very serious and dangerous and started seeping into our homes. If you didn't have super sealed off homes, I don't think anyone really has super sealed off homes. If they do, fine, it's great. But if it lasted 2 or 3 more days, what would we do? You would have to leave. Even that process of leaving, there's nowhere to hide from a whole area covered in haze. How would you even breathe clean air? So how do we prepare for that? Oxygen masks? Should we have oxygen canisters in our homes in case we have a haze outbreak and we need to leave if it concentrates very quickly? It's crazy. And even obviously the superheat, and this is 120 degrees in the Southwest where there are deserts and people are like, oh, it's just desert heat, but it's not desert heat. This is a completely different type of heat. And it's just impossible to think about like what that heat is like. And you were telling me a story of people going to like Joshua Tree to experience the heat.
Yeah, I think I saw a headline somewhere that people were going to Death Valley to experience the heat because it's never been that hot before. It's crazy how we're really living through this climate emergency. I think there's some anxiety. And I've heard it from some people. They feel powerless. They feel like we should be mobilizing as a society. And I think that it bumps people out. We need to have someone on. I was thinking about Britt Ray. She's written a lot about synthetic biology, but she's also written about climate anxiety. Might be good to see if we can get her on to talk about that. Just to change up, Britt's a really interesting person and is a professor at Stanford now. Climate anxiety is real. But here we are at Grow Everything, trying to get people to grow more and to grow everything as a way of helping to mitigate the climate crisis. So we need to grow a lot more, a lot faster. Today, we're talking about growing things, but we're talking specifically about biomanufacturing.
Yes. Like Kristen Ellis said, the Venn diagram between climate and biology is a circle because it is the same thing. So the more biomanufacturing we can do instead of petrochemical manufacturing or using that, the better. Things that are biodegradable and not ruining our environment. And one person that is doing that is our guest today, Josh Robinson of Cocoon Biosciences. Him and his team, he actually is working with another company, but they've come up with a very innovative way to manufacture enzymes and growth factors using cocoons, using moths and that cocoon state. When you told me about it, Karl, I was like, wait, what are you talking about, Karl? And when we interviewed Josh, that's my first time meeting him, and you guys will hear it. It was interesting to hear from him.
So let me just give some context. When people think about biomanufacturing, or at least when we introduce it to people for the first time, we talk about fermentation. Fermentation is something that people can really wrap their heads around. Everybody knows what beer and wine and cheese and yogurt are. But it makes it really easy to explain that fermentation is something that humanity has done since the dawn of civilization. And we do a lot of it in biotech. The products that are produced through biotechnology, they're incredibly valuable. The volume, meaning, let's just say you took an Olympic-sized swimming pool and you filled it with just medicines produced by fermentation, that's worth probably hundreds of billions of dollars. So the value that's created using fermentation can be very high. However, many molecules cannot be created through fermentation because they're too complicated. Josh and his team have started using cocoons, and Josh is going to explain the process of using cocoons and what the benefits are of using cocoons. There's one other company, I think they're called Future Farms, that is also using a different insect for biomanufacturing. But there are many ways to manufacture proteins, and it's not just through fermentation. As I said, some are very complicated and they can't be fermented. So with that, let's let Josh tell us about Cocoon Biosciences and how they use cocoons to manufacture complex proteins.
Hey, Erum. Hey, Josh. Welcome to Grow Everything. It's a pleasure to have you on with us today.
Yeah, Karl, Erum, thank you so much for inviting me out. Really happy to have a chance to chat with you and just share some of the cool stuff I get to see in the biotech world and hear what you're seeing on your end.
Yeah, so why don't we start off by talking about your company, Cocoon Biosciences. What is it that Cocoon does, and how does it fit into the biotech ecosystem?
Yeah, so in a nutshell, we basically use insects in their cocoon state with a very original name, Cocoon Bioscience. We use them as natural bioreactors. So what that means is the way people have been making bioproducts, proteins, enzymes, drugs for years is using bacteria and other single-cell microbes and growing them up in big steel bioreactors that are highly engineered systems with all sorts of monitoring devices and blinking lights. And insects, these cocoon insects, caterpillars, have evolved over billions of years to just say, hey, we'll go into a cocoon state, we'll go into a bioreactor, we'll have some chemical processes, biological processes go, and we'll emerge as something completely different. And so what we do is just leverage this, take this thing that nature has already evolved and use these cocoon insects to make the proteins and enzymes we want them to make at much lower cost than those highly engineered systems can do, and with better performance in most cases.
Oh, wow. That is fascinating. That is so fascinating. Karl knew you first, and he was telling me about Cocoon. I'm like, what is it that they do? Do they really use cocoons? Or is that just like, a name? Congratulations. I know you and your team coming up with technology. What inspired you to start this company with your colleagues?
Yeah, so the story here is actually this technology, Cocoon has been around for 10 months, but we haven't developed this whole platform in 10 months. This has been the result of over a decade of effort by a technical team. Cocoon spun out of our legacy company, Algenex, and Algenex built this platform. It's based in Madrid, and they were focused on vaccines, using insect cells, and then realizing they could jump to real live insects in the cocoon state on an automated platform, because insects aren't moving when they're in the cocoon state. You can move them around. And they built this whole platform to go after the vaccine space. They commercialized product that went through the highest levels of approval in the EU. And so I was attracted to Cocoon because I knew that there was going to be a Cocoon Bioscience, or name to be determined, which ended up as Cocoon, being formed to say, hey, there's this new type of platform, new expression system. We're going to go pursue these other areas beyond just vaccines. Where else can we take this technology? And so I was just really inspired to say, I would love to jump in. I see a few industries right from the start where this could solve a major problem. And the team that came over with the creation of Cocoon included some of the technical leaders who built that platform, who wanted to say, let's see where else we can take this. How do we scale this technology? What other industries do we take it for? So the people that I guess were up for a bit of a crazy startup adventure once again.
I'm super curious in terms of technically how you use the cocoons to produce the proteins or the products. But let's talk about the market, because you said you noticed that there were some immediate markets that you guys could go after where you could solve a big problem. What many people don't know is that as ubiquitous as fermentation is for biotech, there's a lot of things that cannot be produced. Complex proteins cannot be produced through fermentation. And so people are always looking for alternatives, which is one of the reasons why we really wanted to talk to you. But what are some of the things that you guys are producing that solve problems that already exist in the biotech industry?
Yeah, I like that question, but let me just take a step back to kind of say, hey, this is how I got Cocoon, because the company I was with before was Zymergen, which is one of those leading companies in synthetic biology during its existence, acquired by Ginkgo Bioworks last year. And Zymergen's ethos or mandate was to say, where can we take microbial fermentation and biology to make new bioproducts? Let's look at every industry. And one thing I learned from that is you can't twist the arm of microbe too much. They'll make things they want to make. They love to make amino acids. They love to make certain types of simple proteins. But if you ask them to make something too crazy or too outside of this is what I was evolved to do, they'll start to rebel. They'll start to get sickly. They're not going to be too happy. And so there were two industries where we saw people coming to us when we were trying to solve problems. And these areas, first was cultivated meat. Cultivated meat, for those who don't know, it's really meat that's produced from animal cells without killing the animal. Can you grow up cow cells or pig cells into a burger or a slice of bacon without having to kill the animal, without having to raise the animal, without having all the methane emissions from the animal passing gas in the field for a year before it's served up? So this idea had been around since 2013. The first burger from animal cells without killing an animal was made in 2013. But it cost, I think, something like $300,000. So all these companies have been working to try to make this tasty product for consumers at a cost that can compete with traditional meat. And one of the biggest cost barriers they ran into was these growth factors, tiny, highly engineered proteins that get added into this medium mixture to grow up the meat that are basically the instruction manual for the meat cells that say, grow, keep growing, grow, grow, grow. And you only need a little bit of them, but they were something that wasn't really highly used before. So the cost point was astronomical. 95% of the cost of a hamburger that was cultivated meat was from these tiny growth factors that or microgram per liter. And people were approaching Zymergen and asking, can we solve this problem? The technical team was saying, no, this is a really tough thing to get E. coli or yeast or microbial fermentation to do. We're not sure that we can be successful on this. So I got to see, hey, here's the price points we need to be at. This is what we need. Here's the volume. And then when I started talking to people that formed Cocoon Bioscience, to Algenex, I realized their platform was already at these price points that it needed to be at to allow cultivated meat to be cost competitive with traditional meat. So that was one industry where I instantly was like, you've solved the problem already. It's not like there's a science problem to go do. All it is take technology that works and scale it up to the levels that we need to be at. The other one is the enzyme space, that particularly enzymes involved in slightly technically modifying nucleic acid. And I'm stealing that line from one of Zymergen's founders, Zach Serber, who I really like that way of thinking, hey, enzymes that are modifying nucleic acids that affect RNA, that affect DNA. This is not the same as like an enzyme that like is in your laundry detergent and taking some dirt off your shirt. It is precisely moving around base pairs and DNA to do some crazy things. And it's what you need to produce the mRNA vaccines that help to address COVID, or some of the new cell and gene therapies. They're addressing the rare genetic diseases and other things like that. And these enzymes are needed in very small quantities, but again, extremely high price points, and they need to work just right. So they need to be folded in the right way. They need to have the right outside decoration of sugars. Like everything needs to be perfect with them. And this is one where it's tough for, like you said, microbial fermentation can make many things, but it can't make everything. And there's some things it struggles with. And that's where these cocoon insects do a really good job, because it's not just a single cell organism growing up, but it's a full living system. So it has kind of that intracellular coordination to get the folding right, to get the outer sugars, what we'll call glycosylation pattern, so that when we produce these enzymes, they tend to work better than anything else you can get from any other system.
Josh mentioned glycosylation pattern, and that is like a molecular sugar coat that adorns proteins and lipids. Its uniqueness arises from the fact that each protein or lipid can have a distinctive arrangement of sugar molecules attached to it. These patterns are essential for various cellular processes, including protein folding, stability, and how cells communicate with each other and their environment. Glycosylation patterns contribute to the overall diversity and complexity of life's molecular landscape.
And again, because we didn't put a bunch of steel in the ground, we didn't have a team of scientists engineering like the dissolved oxygen and the pH and having all these probes and trying to put expensive ingredients just to grow up these cells, and insect eating dirt cheap food supply and vitamins, and it does everything naturally. We're able to get this high performance at a really low cost point. So those are the two industries where this is not like a stroke of genius. It's like, hey, look, we have really great products that are really highly needed by these industries today. We make them, they work well, and they're able to solve the cost bottlenecks that we're seeing.
Yeah, that is very fascinating. I guess for us, we are very familiar with the cultivated meat space here on the podcast. We had a company called Orbillion came onto our podcast. They make a Wagyu beef, a Grand Wagyu beef. And Karl and I, from our day-to-day job, we've been looking into this space. And that is the billion-dollar question. Like literally the billion-dollar question is, how do you scale up? How do you get to price parity? So I think for us and our listeners, and possibly some future clients who are listening to our podcast that might want to come to Cocoon for a solution, can you walk us through like what is exactly happening? Because you mentioned a full living system. Isn't actually an insect that's growing, or is it a cell mass growing in the cocoons? How do you harvest it? Can you walk us through what that looks like?
Yeah, happy to walk it through. And this is pretty much always the first question I get where I talk about the platform. People are like, oh, you're using insect cells. And we're like, no, we have an insect rearing farm in our R&D lab, which is in Madrid. We have insects going through their life cycle, egg to larvae to pupae to full-grown moth, and then back again laying eggs. And we're building an industrial facility right now. We're just increasing that by exponential amounts of that many more millions of insects going through their life cycle. And that is one of our two raw ingredients, basically. We have insects go in, and then we have what's known as a baculovirus. So basically a virus that we use to infect the insect. And that's our expression system. When you do it in the traditional sense, I'm using E. coli or using microbial fermentation to grow something up. You've kind of engineered that microbe in its DNA to say, this is what I make now. I make this natural product that gets sprayed on plants as a pesticide. These insects aren't modified in any way. They're not genetically modified. They're just cabbage moths, things that are actually common agricultural pests. I think broccoli and cabbage and celery are some of the things they like to eat in the field. So a lot of solutions are out there for killing this type of insect, interestingly enough. We have to make sure it's not in their food supply, because the pesticides that have been designed to kill these insects are sometimes wander into our food supply for them. And then the other piece of it is this baculovirus, this virus, where I catch a virus, I catch a cold, I start to make mucus. That's what that virus causes me to do. This is a virus that's specific to them. It's harmless to mammals, doesn't infect humans or mammals or anything like that. It just infects this insect and like a few of its its cousin. And when it gets in there for 3 to 6 days, it just says, hey, insect, your cells are now going to start making this protein for this enzyme. So basically, we have insects constantly being reared. And then when we get that timing right, hey, we have a batch ready. They're about to enter their chrysalis state. They're in their cocoon state. Let's move into the platform. We have an automated platform to inoculate them with this virus, and then we just incubate them at the right time and temperature and humidity to really maximize their productivity. And then after that 3 to 6 days, we go through pretty standard pharma protein purification techniques. We aren't really reinventing the wheel at that point. We have insect with our protein or growth factor or enzyme of interest in them. We do have to grind them up. So you got to kind of make a paste and we'll separate solid from liquid. But once you have that liquid form, you have basically a cell lysate, which is the same thing you made from traditional fermentation. And so it goes through that same purification process to get to the end product, which you can kind of dial in. Hey, how pure do I need this to be? What sort of quality control specs do I need? What things do I want to really avoid? One thing we do take out in pretty much every product we produce is the baculovirus. We don't want that engineered virus in that final product that can cause issues for both products going into the food space as well as the healthcare space. And then we work with our partners to say, okay, what is that set of specifications you need? Let's make sure that we dial those in and that we're providing you a product that meets your requirements in terms of performance, QC, but also what's that price point you need to be able to accelerate your business.
So I just want to make sure that I got this right so I can summarize to our listeners. You guys are growing these insects, and I'd love to hear what the facility looks like. You basically are infecting them with a virus that is native only to these moths. And as it is with any kind of infection, the immune system of the moth kicks in and it ends up producing your end product. And then you guys purify it out. That's the basic, at a very high level, what you guys do, correct?
You have it 100% correct. And if you want to see the insect rearing facility, Karl, you and Erum, come on out to Spain. We have our R&D facilities in Madrid. I'm up where we're building our industrial facility in northern Spain in a city called Bilbao. Great food, great weather, maybe like a January or February trip. The weather's pretty nice up here. So happy to host people for a tour.
Yeah, Bilbao is one of my favorite places in the world. I was there a couple of years ago. I cannot praise it high enough. And given that the airport symbol is BIO, I think it should be the biotech center for all of Europe.
I've flown in and out of that airport probably 24 times now. I'd never put that together if I'm flying into the bio airport.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to steal that, though, as a endorsement of Bilbao.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So, but what does the facility look like, Josh? I mean, how big is it? You're working on this new facility. Insects reared in one room, infected in another. Give us a picture for our listeners.
Yeah, so our R&D lab is fairly small. That's a couple hundred square meters. So we're able to do the rearing and rear millions of insects in like a small, lab room, and then do that inoculation and purification and the whole process in just a couple, 2-3 lab rooms. But we're not really able to scale it. We're able to go and produce tens of grams of material. And the industries that we're working in, they're scaling. Our partners are scaling fast. So we need to get to kilograms and tens of kilograms of product. And the facility we're doing this in, it's about 4,000 square meters. And if I can do my US metric system conversion rate, I think that's about 40,000 square feet. Production floor is about 24,000 square feet. Think about it, split up 1/3 insect rearing, 1/3 insect inoculation and downstream purification, and then 1/3, warehouse, storage, packaging, get things out the door. So that is an active construction site right now. We are aiming to bring that online right at the start of 2024. We got a ticking clock, but we're making a lot of progress here. But in terms of touring a facility right now, you probably get to see more of the live process in the R&D facility in Madrid.
I just want to make one point for our listeners that a lot of people might not realize that one of the things that biotechnology enables is the production of very valuable molecules that you don't need a lot of. So what Josh is talking a lot about is the molecules that these insects are producing, they can produce them in sub-gram quantities, which in turn enable the production of hundreds of kilograms of product. There's very few industries where you produce something so small, maybe semiconductors, that produce so much value, but even semiconductors are big compared to biology. Go ahead, Josh, and then Erum, sorry.
Yeah, I'll insert my 10-second comment. Sorry, Erum, interrupting as well, but it's 100% right. You think mRNA vaccine, we had to produce billions of doses. The worldwide need for T7RNA polymerase, the main polymerase that makes this mRNA vaccine, is like 500 grams. You could supply 8 billion doses off of just hundreds of grams of this sort of enzyme. Problem is, this enzyme costs millions of dollars per gram. So it's not something where you're like, hey, look, for the $500,000, we're able to supply everything to the world. It's still a highly, like a per atom basis. You're right, some of the most expensive stuff in the world up there with semiconductors and, I don't know, moon dust or something like that.
Right.
I think my question was more to get a more clear picture of what are the insects living in. Is it like a cage or like a beekeeping like sheet? I'm trying to think of what their life is like.
Now, this is one where we're getting a little bit into our IP and innovation and trade secrets, but basically, like, their living chambers that was what a lot of the science was focused on. And we have an entomology team that's still actively doing a lot of innovation in the space to find out what's the exact right type of living chambers to promote the growth of these insects, to automate the process. So, hey, the insects lay eggs here and not there. We can harvest them in this way without disrupting their life cycle. They continue to grow at a robust and repeatable rate. Because really, with this sort of system, we want to eliminate and minimize variation. We want it to be robust. We want each insect to kind of produce, hey, within a few percent, you're producing the same amount of material. It performs the same, which allows us to not have to toss out bad batches and things like that. And all that, actually, there are some patents that are around, like the boxes that the insects go from larvae to pupae and how they eat their diet, how we are collecting their eggs. There's a lot of IP around that. It's not something that's groundbreaking. We're not putting them in like 5-star hotel resorts. It's kind of, hey, you're in this sort of chamber and this size of chamber when you're a baby, and it grows a little bit larger when you're a teenager, and it gets to be full size when you're an adult. But this is something that involves more science than you would think around how to raise them off.
Yeah, I believe it.
Of course, this I'm sure has a sustainability angle. What specifically does it aid? What kind of energy reductions? Can you share a little bit more about the sustainability story of Cocoon?
Yep, happy to. And so, yeah, sustainability is at one of our core missions, is to help promote more sustainable industry. And for cultivated meat, if you've talked with Orbillion, if you've talked to other companies, you know exactly what's important on that. It's traditional meat has a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. It has a lot of land usage. It has a lot of water usage. It's not great for the environment. And as we continue to grow as a global population, we need to find alternative source of proteins, which is why the alternative protein industry is growing the way it is. And by having our growth factors be at the price point and the performance they are, we're hoping to catalyze the growth of this industry to allow it to take off by saying, yeah, we can make your cultivated meat. Our partner, the cultivated meat producer, have that meat that can sit side by side in the grocery store, the restaurant, with traditional or conventional meat and be the same price, so that you don't have to ask consumers to pay a premium for feeling good about promoting sustainability. And you want to see that kind of that same sort of growth of like a plant-based milk probably seemed kind of crazy 30 years ago, and then more people started accepting it 20 years ago, and now everyone's like, all right, yeah, I need the soy almond milk in my latte at Starbucks. So that's really what we want to help catalyze. Is our products themselves, our footprint is very low on the carbon footprint side. We do try to find more sustainable, energy efficient ways of doing things, but it's really what can our products create, or what sort of sustainable industries can our products drive for. On the healthcare side, I will be completely frank, the enzymes we make don't help make things more sustainable. The way we view it is they help increase healthcare access by lowering the cost of genetic sequencing so that the insurance providers will reimburse it as a insurable test, and it can be a clinical test. By allowing mRNA therapeutics and vaccines to be more affordable, we just want to help promote greater healthcare access. So if it doesn't have a huge direct sustainability, then I still feel like that's a pretty good mission to incorporate in, and not something that we want to ignore for the sake of saying, oh, 100% sustainability all the time. Unsustainable, it's just not sustainable.
Yeah, I'm glad you're making that distinction, Josh. One of the things that we wanted to ask you is, one of the big draws to your technology is the fact that it is cost effective. How is it that you guys were able to achieve that cost effectiveness? And why is it that other technologies, I mean, we talk a lot about just traditional fermentation, why aren't they able to achieve that same kind of effectiveness? And has that lack of cost stalled innovation in food and health?
So I think it has. I think the cost barrier will stall innovation. There's no way around it. And what you see from traditional systems, and this might be a simple framework for thinking about it, but as you increase scale, the price decreases. So if I'm making 100,000 kilotons of phytase enzymes for animal feed, I can make that really cheap. Or if I'm making 100,000 kilotons of amylase for laundry detergent enzyme, I can make that really cheap. I can build these big bioreactors that can sit there for 50 years. They can operate. They become a depreciated asset, and I can start to lower cost. But at that higher end, where you have these enzymes and growth factors and other proteins and other biologics that are only needed in really smaller quantities, but have kind of a critical part to play in a larger industry, traditional fermentation doesn't do a great job of saying, oh, yeah, well, if we're only making 500 grams a year, we'll slowly lower the cost. That's no problem. No, it's, hey, we have to spend a lot. Like, that's just the way this technology works. We're doing small batches in very expensive systems that have a lot of CapEx, that have a lot of operational expense. With the insect, it's kind of interesting where it's just completely linearly scalable. We can inoculate one insect, we can inoculate 1,000, we can inoculate 1,000,000, and our costs really just change from how much of their cheap diet do we have to feed the insects. We didn't have to invest in more lower CapEx. We don't have to really change our cost structure. So we don't have that inflection where it goes up in price as you get to really small quantities. The other piece of it is when you get that innovation, you're saying, look, I need to develop a new molecule. I need to develop a new protein or a new food ingredient. With traditional fermentation, that's a big activation energy. You got to spend a lot of time doing engineering of your microbe. And if it's something complex, all the low-hanging fruit has been picked. Now, if you're trying to go after something more complex, again, you're twisting the arm of biology. You're making it do things it doesn't want to do. That takes more strain, more effort in doing that R&D. So it's a higher cost. So you have to say, look, I'm only going after this if it's worth my while, if I can see $100 million product off of here, which means we've left a lot of really useful $1 million, $2 million products on the cutting board because we're saying, well, it's going to take $10 million to engineer the strain to do that. With these insects, it's nice. They just naturally produce the proteins and enzymes. We engineer the baculovirus. It's very low cost. It's very quick. We can go from, hey, this is what I want you to make to, oh, here's product for testing in about 8 to 10 weeks. And with a really high success rate because we're not fighting biology. We're just going with what's already evolved.
Cool. That's really great. You can definitely see how valuable that is. So you closed our fundraising round in March. Congratulations. Always a big milestone for an entrepreneur to raise money. But how are you planning on raising the funds? Sounds like you're building a new laboratory or a new manufacturing plant. And like, what are you hoping for the future of Cocoon Biosciences?
Yeah, so I want to say we have a bit of a luxury compared to many startups, given that we are a spin out of really a developed technology that's gone through the regulatory process, that's proven its commercial viability, that all the technical hurdles have been overcome for the most part. We're taking this funding and we're not trying to like build an airplane. We're saying, hey, this is already built. Let's just scale it. So the bulk of our funding really is going towards our industrial facility to take our scale of production from gram to kilogram, just to really stay in line, stay up with what our partners need. That's the bulk of our funding. We obviously are engaging, like I said, a lot of innovation on how we're rearing the insects. We're doing more innovation on how we automate that platform around because insects in their cocoon state, you don't want to hurt them too much. They're pretty fragile. So we're trying to find ways to be nicer to them. But yeah, we are all about let's scale this production. Let's get our product out the door. Let's have 2024 be a year focused on production and expanding our product portfolio. And I think that was something that appealed to investors in the current climate of maybe not 2 or 3 years ago. We weren't starting a crypto exchange or anything like that. So having a business that could produce product that was able to generate a profit was highly attractive. Not to dump on crypto exchanges or anything like that. Anyone listening and working for one of them.
So you mentioned different products. So right now you're using a moth. What are other insects that are in the cocoon state? And have you thought about using other cocoon-based insects?
Yeah, are there any advantages to using other cocoon-based insects?
That's a really good question. I don't think we've done a wide amount of experimentation, like let's gather everything that is insect and we'll stop moving so we can automate it. That being said, the moth we're using, it's called a Trichopusian, it's a cabbage moth. It is the native host for this baculovirus, this virus that we use. So it is more easily able to get inoculated with this virus and then have it work its magic once it's infected with this virus to be able to produce the proteins and enzymes. Again, we're trying to use that same virus with a different type of insect is starting to twist the arm of biology a little bit to say, well, you're not used to this virus, but maybe it will get you a little sick and start to make things. That being said, the baculovirus, it's not new innovation. It's something that people have used insect cells to produce pharmaceutical drugs for 30 years. And I think people have looked at different insect cell lines. So if we had the luxury of, hey, here's all the R&D dollars in the world, let's go explore some things. It might be interesting to say, okay, where did those insect cell lines come from that are used to produce these pharmaceutical drugs from baculovirus today? Maybe we should try those insects. So when my technical team's assigned a new R&D task, I tell them that they can grumble to you for coming up with the idea.
Yeah, because looking at like, all right, so would it be helpful to have bigger size cocoons? And it seems like a quick internet search, so I didn't do a lot of research here, but it says that polyphemus moths have very large cocoons. The moths themselves have wingspans up to 6 inches long. So I don't know if that could be something. If we're really looking to scale up, maybe bigger cocoons could be a solution. Who knows? I mean, I know you need the virus and has to match, but
that's pretty interesting. And you can take it to the extreme. I mean, we could get some hibernating bears and just kind of get them going and start producing things. I'm sure they could produce a lot of growth factors, but I could see the health and safety record of X many days since an accident in the lab, a little bit smaller.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think so. I want to be mindful of time, Josh. And to me, I think there's several tremendous messages for our audience. But one is just the fact that fermentation is not a one-size-fits-all solution. And you guys have a solution that is very elegant. It uses nature. It's been well tested. It already has proven to be able to produce some very high value molecules. And we need more solutions like this. So I'm kind of curious, what does Cocoon look like in 3 and 10 years? And what does the biotech industry look like in the next 3 to 10 years?
Absolutely. So that's a good question. It's easier to answer answer for Cocoon, which is something I'm thinking about all the time. And then hopefully I'll read and gives me a few seconds to think about the answer for the biotech industry. But we're positioning ourselves as saying, yeah, we are an expression system. We use insects in their cocoon state. Other expression systems are really good at a number of things. We're not saying we can solve every problem. There's just this 5% of corner cases where this makes more sense than what you're trying to fit the old system, square peg, round hole type of thing. And so in 3 years, we really just want to see our production scale, get our factory online, get it operating at 100 capacity, help our partner companies scale. And, what I call a champagne problem, where this would be something to deal with, we might have to expand our production capacity in 2025, in 2026. One thing I would really be interested in exploring is seeing, hey, what's the geographical footprint we should have? Is it something where we need more facilities, one focused on enzymes and one focused on growth factors because food grade and food regulations and GMP regulations are different? Or should we have, hey, there's a production facility in North America and a production facility in Southeast Asia to kind of co-locate where the biotech industry is flourishing? And I think that goes along with where's biotech in 3 years. We're starting to see the dominoes fall in a few industries where bioproducts are saying, yes, we are the ones that make sense. It's not just a fanciful scientific experiment, but this is something you should be using. Agriculture using biologics the past 10 years, farmers have started saying, yeah, we should use more biologics. It makes more sense than the chemical solutions, both for pesticides and for fertilizer. You can continue to see more inroads there. Maybe it's not 10 million acres. Maybe it's 100 million acres or 500 million acres in 3 years where we see all these products. And I expect to see each domino knocking over two more dominoes where you say, hey, biologics and agriculture work. What if we try to take them to mining? And you start to see that now it's starting to gain traction in new industries. If the chemical industries and biological industries were at even starting point today, we go back to 1940s when plastic started their revolution and we had the biology that we have today, the science we have today. I don't think you'd build up a bunch of chemical plants. If they're both on even footing, you'd say we should make this from biology. People weren't caring too much about sustainability as much back then, but you'd say, hey, it's more affordable. We don't have to build a $500 million plant. We can do it on smaller scale. And I think within 10 years, the intrinsic advantages of just being the first people there, the first industry there for chemical and oil and gas start to erode, and biotech starts to really eat into their lunch, so to speak. And where Cocoon is at, I can't make a perfect prediction there, but I would love to say we are a large piece of catalyzing a lot of those industries that are starting to eat the lunch of oil and gas and then the chemical industry.
That's great. I mean, you mentioned, there's different bioproducts that could be made. Do you have a bioproduct company that you admire?
I really admire companies that are tackling problems not just for the sake of sustainability, but are saying we have a more sustainable product, but it also solves a big problem outside of sustainability. Like the user will use this and say, my life is better now, great helping the environment and future generations, but also great that now my difficulty is dissolved. And so I mentioned in the last comment about the biologics revolution in agriculture, and one company that comes to mind that I admire, Pivot Bio, with their nitrogen fixing bacteria, where they're saying nitrogen fertilizer, super damaging for the world. Lots of greenhouse gas emissions. You're literally electrifying the air. That requires a lot of energy. What if we just take these microbes that take nitrogen from the air with no cost and provide it to a plant like soy and start using them for other plants like corn? It's a great solution for the sustainability standpoint, but it makes money for farmers. Yeah, I spend less money on nitrogen fertilizer, which has shot up in prices over the past 5 years. And now I get to go just save money, have an easier process with the farm. And oh, by the way, it's more sustainable and there's maybe a carbon credit market developing. And they've actually done it. I think I saw a press release where it's on millions of acres. So they've not just done a fun science project, but said, all right, here's the commercial impact. Let's build a real, viable, sustainable, and profitable business off of this. So companies like that tackling those sorts of problems, I just look at them like, you guys are awesome. Keep going.
Nice. And I'll ask this final question because it's one of my favorites because it helps educate myself and our listeners. Do you have a favorite business or biotech book, movie, or show? Because, we watch different types of content. Do you have anything to recommend to the audience?
Well, I'm going to go with book because I try to tell my kids to limit their screen time. So I'll try to do that same to the audience. I'm going to put two answers. One is I like reading fiction. I read some business books and things like that, but I love fiction. And Hail Mary, the book by Andy Weir, the guy who wrote The Martian, his follow-up novel. I read it last year. I love it because it's a fun fictional adventure of a guy going out into space and solving crazy problems. But also the way he solves problems is like how a scientist would solve problems in a lab. Like, here's my scientific method. Here's my DBTAL cycle to engineer an enzyme or a crazy impossible particle that does something crazy and impossible to gravity, but applying the scientific method. So you're reading it. It's an entertaining read, but also you're like, yeah, this is how scientists think. It took me 3 days to get through it. So I highly recommend that one. Second answer, I said I was cheating. This is a book that was really early in my career. So this is something I might recommend to scientists in grad school or very early in the career. Successful Scientific scientific writing. Janice Matthews is the author, because I know it's important to have authors, because successful science writing might lead to 10 different books. It was just a short manual that I got in grad school that helped me, kind of like that sophomore in high school was just trying to get an assignment done and get a 10th grade English pass, and went to really, okay, this is how you communicate science in a way that seems professional, is logical, can be followed, and someone else can take that writing and then go and recreate it. That helped me a lot in my career, just to be able to communicate science better, and that was successful science writing.
Those are great recommendations. I loved Hail Mary, and Successful Scientific Writing is an incredible book, which is highly recommended as well. So thank you for mentioning both of those. Was there anything that you want to talk about that we didn't mention today or that we didn't get to?
Well, so you guys see that wide range of everything in the industry. So I really want to ask you, like I mentioned, which dominoes are first to fall, which industries are first to embrace that biorevolution? Based on all the people you've been talking to, what's your thoughts on this? Where do you think we will start to look around and say, yep, this is the bio industry that led the way?
I don't think it's a simple answer. Erum, you might have a better answer than I do, because now you've stumped me. But I feel like we see, of course, healthcare, biopharma is, we could say, by far the most advanced, because they were the first ones to really apply biotech to develop drugs. But the other place where I see it, where I don't think it gets as much press, though we're in it, is in the beauty and cosmetic space. The manufacturing is being changed. The active ingredients are being changed. The labeling is being changed. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting developments when it comes to the way those products are labeled, and people need to be educated on what those labels mean. So I'm very excited about that space. And that is one of those spaces that touches people's everyday lives. And so we just had a conversation with Nathan Pumlin, who is behind the company that has the purple tomato. So food is another space that I think we're going to see a lot of innovation in. And one of the things he pointed out is that today you've got an organic label that was developed by the USDA, and that is seen as a premium product by most consumers, whereas the bioengineered label is seen as a warning. And he thinks that in the next 3 to 5 years, the bioengineered label will also be seen as a premium product because of the benefits of bioengineering being made clear to consumers. So I think food and beauty and cosmetics are probably the places where I'd say we're very close to seeing a lot of the innovations that have been happening behind the scenes being made more public. I don't know, Erum, what do you think?
You and I have a hive mind. So absolutely. I would just add the reason for the beauty and personal care from a business standpoint is that you can make their lower volume products for a higher margin. It is touching people's lives, touching their faces. It's very sought after. The promise of beauty is something that people are attracted to, literally. And then, of course, food and nutrition. That's something we put in our bodies, something we need. It's the basis of our healthcare. People are eating foods that might not have the nutritional value that they need, but if there could be functional foods that can keep diseases at bay and done through bioengineering, then why not, right? It's going to be safe and healthy. So I think the biggest things, and for Messaging Lab, for us here, is that it's an education piece because people want to know why. They'd like to hear a good story. They just want really good customer experiences. They want delicious tasting food, like you mentioned at the top of the episode.
I would agree with you both quite a bit. And it's funny that you bring up that bioengineered food. I actually, earlier today, was having a conversation. I have a Spanish company. I take Spanish classes every week. And with my Spanish tutor, we were talking about bioengineered foods. And she was like, what's your thoughts on GMO? And I'm trying to launch into this big argument of why it's beneficial and it helps our food supply. And like, you have to engineer these traits in so you don't have to spray with pesticides as much and improve yield and better land usage. I'm trying to do it in Spanish and I'm working my way up in fluency. So it was such a struggle of finding the words to explain such a complex topic. And I'm basically working with about 100 Spanish words at the moment. At some point, I just gave up. I was like, I can barely explain this in English. I think we need to come up with a new line of conversation. We'll continue this next week. Give me some time to prep. But all that being said, I think it's right because the food is one where, like I said, there's a critical problem to solve. Like we can't keep the food industry going as is. And it's one where you start to screw up the food industry, mess up the food industry. Like people get hungry, things change real quickly. Like that's when regulations and science get the green light to go ahead. When that first like, hey, I think we're out of food in this country, or I think we're out of food in this region, will accelerate that quite a bit. And bioengineering will be the savior, not the enemy, the devil.
Yeah, I feel for you in terms of trying to do that in Spanish. I am fluent bilingual in Spanish. And when I've done biotech presentations, what I've done is I practice the hell out of them with all the native Spanish beet sugars because the vocabulary is just so different from what we normally speak in a conversational level. But you'll get there, Josh. I'm sure you will.
Poco a poco. I'm getting there bit by bit. But I feel like this is just karmic revenge for how much I might have slacked off in high school Spanish 25 years ago. And so now, it's like, we told you need to learn this language. Eventually, the Spanish people was right.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to wrap up the pod here. Thank you so much, Josh, for taking the time. This is a fantastic episode. We'd love to have you come back in 6 or 12 months and hear the kinds of progress that you've made.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Karl and Erum, thanks for having me. Thanks for having a really engaging conversation. I love the questions and that thought-provoking, hey, where do we go? How do we play our part? And where does biotech go? And would love to come back and chat with you anytime. So appreciate everything.
All right. Well, have a great afternoon.
Bye.
All righty, Rem, what did you think about that interview?
First off, Josh Robinson is a master communicator. I love the terms he's using that I've never heard of really in the context that he has. For example, he mentioned an expression system, really to describe how the bioproduct is made. I also love when he said certain enzymes need to be folded in the right way. They need to have the right outside decoration of sugars. I just love that he's really painting a picture of how these enzymes need to be formed. What does it actually look like? I really appreciate that. For us at Messaging Lab, we are all about strategic communications, and we know that Josh is like a sensei. I've learned so much just from talking to him, and I'm excited to talk to him again. The biggest thing I think, and I would love your comments on this, is that essentially what they're doing is leveraging the process of metamorphosis. That is one of the most exciting biological processes. I knew that as a toddler, and I know it now because I have a toddler. To read The Hungry Caterpillar, and it's this journey of growth until you can grow no more, and then you transform into something beautiful and just fly off. So there are many messages and stories that can come from that I'm sure Cocoon Biosciences can use. So Josh, if you're listening, hit us up. We'll talk about it.
Yeah, I just want to make it clear because you're right, they are leveraging metamorphosis, but really what they're doing is they're hijacking the immune system of these cocoons. So just like we fight infection when we're faced with a virus, these cocoons do the same thing. And as Josh explained, they use this expression system that consists of a virus that can only infect these gypsy moths. And as a result of that infection, the larval state mounts an immune response. And in that immune response, they end up producing the target protein, which is just so elegant and brilliant. And I know it's complicated, but then you end up producing the target protein or the protein that you're looking for. And he talks about downstream processing, which is basically they take the cocoons, they crush them, they run them through multiple filters, and they end up with a product that is used as a growth factor in cell therapy or for cultivated meat. So that is something that is incredible. I think you asked the question, what do the moths eat? It's a great question. I don't know. I do know that there are these places around the world that are economic zones. And I have talked to people who are on the insect cultivation side, and they grow black fly larvae on organic waste. It sounds disgusting, black fly larvae, but they produce a very nutritious oil. So you can feed organic waste, like the organic waste we compost here in New York City, to these fly larvae, and then they can turn it into an oil that can be used for nutritional purposes. I also wonder what those moths are eating in Cocoon's facility.
Well, I'm sure it's part of their IP because it's very interesting to hear that the container that moths are growing in is a part of their IP. I don't know if they make a food, which that probably isn't the case because that's like a whole nother process. But it would be interesting if, like you're saying, with the black fly larvae, are these moths eating waste? Can it be a complete circular process? Could they eat, for example, some type of fruit waste or part of a vegetable that we're not eating, or just grass? Or is it cardboard? The moths that are in our house that we have mothballs for eating cardboard?
I also think that in the larval state, some of those, I don't know if this is the case with the moths that Cocoon is using, but when a butterfly is in a chrysalis, it's not eating. So it could be in that state as well. I think it's actually before that state where it's still closer to caterpillar or larva for the caterpillar. I have to see a picture of what that looks like. But it could be a state where the cocoon doesn't need to be fed.
Well, the cocoon doesn't need to be fed, but the larva needs to be fed. It's like in the story.
Yeah, I think it brings up all these great possibilities.
Yeah, just like the book, The Hungry Caterpillar, it's eating through some fruits, then it eats through ice cream and sausage and a lollipop. I don't think they're feeding that to the Cocoon Biosciences moths, but they have to eat and they get fat and then they go in the cocoon state. So that would be interesting.
That Eric Carle, Very Hungry Caterpillar is quite the journey.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, in my house, the book that was very popular was The Grouchy Ladybug.
Same as Eric Carle.
Yeah, The Very Hungry Caterpillar was popular, but The Grouchy Ladybug was more popular.
One other thing I thought was really interesting, and this is more from a business standpoint, that the company that created this technology, Josh mentioned, is called Algenex. So they created this platform, they productize it, and they call it Crisp Bio. And Josh is leading the company to scale up or commercialize in a particular market. And And sounds like it'll be the cultivated foods market, perhaps a healthcare market with these growth factors and enzymes. But I thought that was interesting because we meet a lot of companies that are developing these platforms. And instead of them building out the products, for certain companies, would it work for them to have another company license their technology or like build another company to address a certain market versus building it themselves? I just thought that that was really interesting from a business standpoint. That's the model for Cocoon Biosciences. It's not the technology that they've built, but they are just using it. I know it's common, but I just thought in the biotechnology space, and we haven't seen much of that. At least I haven't seen much of that. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
I do, Erum. You need to study the SynBio tool stack, which we can go into in a different episode. But basically, the idea is, and this happens in other industries too, where, for example, the farmer is not the person that creates the cardboard boxes and is also not the person that is shipping the produce to the store. In synthetic biology, you've got a stack of companies that some are doing protein discovery, some well-optimized protein production, some are doing biomanufacturing. You've got tons of computational tools. So there is a stack. It's the same thing in technology. You have technology stacks that just make it much easier for people to build a company without having to become experts in every little thing. So I think what Josh and his team are doing fits. And the fact that they were spun out of Algenex just shows that Algenex must have seen that there was potential for this platform, probably didn't leverage their expertise, and they brought Josh along to be the guy to commercialize it.
The fact is that they didn't continue to sell under Algenex. I understand the stack that these different technologies and everyone's selling parts to build out a technology. It's my understanding that Josh and his team are not building technology. They're working with Algenex.
Right. So they're just focused on the scale up and commercialization of the technology. I hope I wasn't like mansplaining. I feel bad now. I try not to do that.
No, you weren't mansplaining. I just think maybe I didn't like explain it right. It's okay. But now what am I doing? What's like the opposite of mansplaining? It's when women apologize for like...
You don't need to be apologize. We were both right. I think that, yeah, we're both right.
Hopefully we weren't wrong about it.
We do get people who email us and thank us for what we've done. So I just want to appreciate it. We just got a really nice letter from someone who was asking about labeling. And that is something we're going to be talking about in the future. So just want to say thank you to the people who have been reaching out to us and giving us some positive feedback on the newsletter, and really appreciate that. Please keep letting us know. And next time when we get on, we'll shout you out.
Yeah, you share that with me. And there were a few people that have reached out. So that is awesome. I mean, we're doing this for you guys. We want people to understand what's going on in the world. Josh Robinson's Cocoon Biosciences is just so fascinating. There are others. The world is very diverse in terms of types of biological systems that we could leverage. Unfortunately, though, that diversity is getting less diverse with extinction and endangered species. I don't want to end on a buzzkill note. But that said, there's just so many exciting things. And then Karl and I will be uncovering those. We're meeting these people. We'll bring them to you. So definitely tune in, subscribe, and suggest our podcast to others. I am on the verge of getting this phone number. So if you want to call and talk, you can. I will put it in the show notes when we do get that number. So just go in the show notes. It should be already hyperlinked if you have an iPhone. I don't know how Androids work, but you should be able to give us a call or text us. And if you leave a voice message, hopefully play it. We have these big aspirations to make our podcast way more interactive than it is, because we know you guys have so many comments and thoughts about these topics and we want to hear it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's the pod. Thanks for listening. And until next time.
See you later.